under threat and might be depressed as well, and that's kind of the symptom profile of susto. And that's recognized as a folk disease, and that's something that shamans can treat. They have a whole diagnostic sort of profile of this thing. And I think it's what we would call anxiety disorder, and they can deal with it. So that's one example. And it's interesting that you ask, what is the prevalence of mental illness? It's interesting to deal with these folks who materially, they don't have much, they don't really have anything compared to what we have, and yet they seem to be pretty stable, pretty well adjusted mentally compared to us. I mean, it may be that some of these mental illnesses are essentially Western diseases. We live in an abundance of material things, but we're spiritually bereft. And, people feel that lack in their lives. And I think that is reflected in higher levels of depression and anxiety and all of the things that we live with in modern life. That's why psychedelics are, in some ways, they can be the antidote to that. But of course, they're not allowed to be used. That may change someday. One of the things that we're hoping for with this work that the Hefter is involved in, and Roland Griffith's work, if enough data accumulates that psilocybin, for example, could be used to treat anxiety in people that are in hospice situations or facing end-of-life situations, then that could lead to its approval by the FDA for that use. If you present enough information, show that it's safe, I'll go through all the hoops that you have to go through. Once it's approved for some use like that, it has to be moved from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2, or somewhat less restrictive schedule. And so you can think about medical psilocybin. You could have psilocybin used as a medicine. Once it's approved for one use, then it opens the door to all these so-called off-label uses. So that's one way to liberate psilocybin from the lab and actually get it into medical use.
Thank you for that. And actually, what you're saying leads into the next question I have for you.
Okay.
In the Western world, namely the U.S., there's a stigma against those with mental disorders. Could it be to suppress the natural evolution of our minds? I've noticed that some people with some kind of diagnosis tend to exert outward what a lot of us would usually keep inside. It's almost like a constant cleansing process, like with schizophrenia or depression or some other disorders and diagnoses.
Well, yeah. I mean, people with mental illnesses are stigmatized in our society. I mean, the fact that we even call them mental illnesses, that's one way to stigmatize them, is to set them apart into this category of people that are, somehow defective, or thought of as defective. They're not, because they don't think like most people think. I do think that societies have always stigmatized people who think differently, or whose normal state of consciousness is not, there is no norm, right? What is normal consciousness? But there are some people that have, whose normal day-to-day state of mind is different than most people's. They've always been stigmatized. In our culture, they're called mentally ill, which is actually probably a more compassionate way to look at them. 100 years ago, they might have been, say, well, they're possessed by demons, or, they're witches, or, they have all of those things. Mentally ill people were looked at in that way too. And because they were different, and because the interpretation was, that they have demonic possession or something, the remedies were pretty drastic, like they could be killed, that all these people had to be gotten rid of. This is what's going on in the Amazon right now with the shamans. I mean, it's very interesting that this has come up. It's very tragic that this has come up again. But again, the fanatic evangelical interpretation of shamanism is that they're witches and they should be killed. And that's not so long ago. That's how it was in our culture too. So I guess to say that they're mentally ill is maybe a progress in some way. I mean, at least it's a more compassionate way to look at people who have different consciousness than we have. I mean, it's kind of like they're slowly evolving a different way to look at people with substance addictions and that sort of thing. We view them as it's a medical problem now. They're not criminals. They're not necessarily bad people. They're just people who made some bad choices. So slowly attitudes evolve in society, but we still have a long way to go.
All right. Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, M. Sanchez. Our next question comes from Five Cook.
Hey, Dennis. I enjoyed your comment earlier tying in some of our modern neuroses with just the general lifestyle that our Western civilization leads. And I think about diabetes as a classic example of something which is manifested only within our culture. So my question is, how can we get our society off this train wreck that our modern psychiatric industry has become and head it off into a beneficial direction which actually helps people suffering these horrible mental aberrations? If we can't change the culture right away, I know people receive SSRI medications, for instance, and it seems like they trade one set of horrible symptoms for another. Do you have any realistic hope that the next 10 years, say, would bring us out of our present option system to a better one which uses plant medicines for the betterment of our world?
Boy, you just touched on about 5 major topics here that we could spend the rest of the session talking about that, and they're all really good. And the short answer is I don't know. I don't know what the solution is. I think, like most of them, we know what the problems are. What do you do about it? I think that you can't do anything about it without completely reforming the way medicine is practiced in this country, not only in this country, but more and more globally. Medicine is very much about, the problems go so deep, medicine is very much about the fix, the pharmacological fix. And it relies very much on pharmaceuticals, pharmaceutical therapies, and all that. Partly that's because, even people don't have time to spend with patients. A person gets to see his doctor maybe 5 minutes if you're lucky. And it's the way that the whole finances and everything for biomedicine is structured. What's been taken out of medicine, the way it's practiced these days, if you ask me, is that healing has been exorcised from medicine, and to a certain extent spirit has been exorcised from medicine, and at base I think that's a lot of the problem right there. This and that really comes out of the 19th century. That comes out of, believe it or not, the discovery of the fact that you can isolate from plants something like morphine. In fact, morphine was the first pure plant drug to be isolated. And guess what? It has most of the properties of opium. It's a good analgesic, it's a good euphoriant, and so on. But it's clearly not alive, right? It's a crystal. It's a chemical compound. So that changed the attitude of medicine to the idea, but because formerly plants were understood to kind of have a spiritual energy. And it wasn't so much about their chemistry, it was about their energetics. And that led to a change in attitude where, people or organisms were not looked at as spiritual entities anymore. They were looked at like machines, right? They're just machines. They're just physical chemical systems. When something goes wrong with that system, if you can apply the right molecular monkey wrench, if you will, you can fix the machine. And so you get this mechanical sort of paradigm. You get this mechanical approach to healing. What you lose is the spiritual aspect. And this is what alternative medicine, complementary medicine, is trying to sort of rediscover, reintroduce. I mean, I work at the University of Minnesota. My home department is called the Center for Spirituality and Healing, right? And it's right in the middle of the biomedical complex. It's right in the middle of the medical school. When they started this program about 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of pushback by many of the doctors. And they opposed it. They said, what does spirituality have to do with healing? Right? What do we, this is all just poppycock. This is, new age hippie nonsense, well, so that was the attitude that they had to buck, and to a certain extent, medicine is changing, but it changes very slowly. People are beginning to realize, that spirituality is indeed an important element of healing, and that without it, you can give people all the drugs that you want, and they're not going to be cured. It's the difference between this sort of mechanical approach to healing and the fact that you have to acknowledge there's a spiritual aspect of it too. You have to treat the spirit as well as the body.
Aren't we seeing the same thing in the whole physics now, getting away from the mechanistic, where we've just got a bunch of billiard balls running around out in the universe, and more of a cohesive, organic, for lack of a better word, approach to it?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I mean, but and again, it takes a while for these new perceptions to diffuse into the general population. I mean, I think that's one of the things that quantum mechanics, for example, which under the best of circumstances is hard to understand, but it has reintroduced into physics this notion of the observer. And paradoxically, it means that, in physics, consciousness is actually becoming primary, right? Because unless there's an observer, the wave function remains indeterminate, and it never does collapse, so you don't know what's going on. And in medicine, I think what we're doing, I think that the psychedelics are helping to catalyze this move toward a healing paradigm, which is something like a combination of psychotherapy, shamanism, and conventional biomedicine. What I'd like to see is some kind of paradigm that combines, that borrows from all these modalities, and something that is not any one of them, but better than all of them will emerge. Do I think it will emerge? Probably not. I don't see how that's going to happen until medicine is reformed. I mean, that's the whole healthcare debate is about that in a sense.
Yes, I try not to get too pessimistic, but boy, the moneyed interests have such a death grip on the whole system that I don't see them letting go of it. I mean, there's too much money to be made, and I totally agree, and I think that's part of the problem. What I don't see happening in this country is, and other countries as well, what I don't see happening is the idea that medicine should be a for-profit activity is wrong to me. I think that's wrong, and I think that people, medicine should not profit from people's misfortunes, and if you look at other countries where, they have different medical systems, like Canada is one example. I've lived in Canada. I